Dr. MacDonald, this topic is extremely sensitive to me. I wondered if I would go to hell. I believed in it. I really believed this was a place where God would torture people, or they would, depending on my time and my theology, they did it to themselves or God intentionally did it. Just depended on when you were finding Derek Lambert and where he was at the moment, trying to understand his Bible. I read a book by Mary Kay Baxter, who had a vision and went to sleep, and Jesus came and took her on a tour, literally, through hell. And hell is in the shape of a human body. So you enter it through the jaw, through the mouth, and you go in and there's torture and pitchfork and melting the flesh off, and it comes back on. And the level of detail that she wrote was so artistic and gruesome, I could see it. I was a young teen, and I couldn't sleep good at night thinking about it after reading that book for a while. And all the people right now that were burning, all this stuff in my head. It was really dark and deep. And my mom, I love her so much. And I want her to know she's scared. She's a Christian. She's honestly terrified about hell when she goes to think about it. And she always says, I'm not worthy. So I hope in today's educational video, we dispel the notion this is true in any literal sense and understand where it comes from a scholar such as yourself. So there's my intro. I just had to get it off my chest.
Derek, I love this topic. And I did a taping for the History Channel as a talking head on the history of Hades and hell. And so I have a lot of material, and I don't know if we're going to get through in a half an hour. I doubt if we will. And I'm going to start with two jokes. One about heaven and one about hell, and the other about the literary playfulness of tours of hell in antiquity. The first has to do with heaven. Jesus is aware that Peter got a short straw in the drawing about who's going to allow people into heaven, because everybody else is, flying around with the angels, playing harps, enjoying the streets of gold. And there Peter is day after day talking to millions of people, trying to determine whether they belong in heaven or in hell. So Jesus comes to Peter and he said, hey, Mr. Rock, I want to give you some relief. You're about time for you to enjoy the delights of heaven yourself. And so I want you to tell me what I can do to spell you so that you can enjoy the angels. And Peter said, Lord, I am so grateful for that. I'm so tired of doing this ceaselessly and have to send people to hell. It is not a happy job. So I'm going to give you the short form. You just ask people where they're from, what they did as an occupation, what are their virtues and vices, and then make a judgment about whether they belong here or not. Well, Jesus says, I think I can handle that. So Peter went off and started flying around with the angels and eating ambrosia and all that. And Jesus was really pretty good for several days in doing the short form and getting people determined whether they're in heaven or hell. And there was an old man that came up, and Jesus said, old man, where are you from? He said, well, I'm from a little village in the Mediterranean basin. Jesus said, oh, that's fine. And what was your occupation? He said, well, I was a carpenter. Oh, Jesus says, oh, that's very interesting. You're a carpenter. And tell me about your virtues and vices. He said, well, my life was not that interesting, but I had a son who was known for telling the truth. And Jesus said, Father? And the old man said, Pinocchio? Okay, so that's the heaven story. The hell story is this. A Lutheran pastor dies. A good Lutheran. And he goes to hell. And he tells the devil, hey, there must be a mistake. I'm a Lutheran pastor. And the devil said, we did install a new computer system, and there have been some glitches, and we have some data problems. So you're welcome to stay down here and look around, and we won't put you through bad tortures. But we really have to verify whether you belong here or not. So the devil thanked, the Lutheran pastor thanked the devil, and he walked around and he saw three guys talking to each other, dressed very differently. And so he came up to them and was just going to chat. And one of them was wearing a Roman toga and looked quite Jewish, had a beard and his eyebrows met. And so he said, excuse me, you look like the Apostle Paul that I've seen on icons. And he said, ego eimi Paulus. And he said, you're the Apostle Paul? He said, yeah. And so he then noticed that there was another man in a Roman toga holding a codex and very wise looking. And he said, the pastor said to him, you look like images that I've seen of St. Augustine. And he said, ego sum Augustinus. He said, you're St. Augustine? What the hell are you doing here? And then he saw a corpulent man in a cassock and holding a leather Bible. And he said, you really look like what we Lutherans cherish as a vision of Luther. And he said, Ich bin Luther. He said, you're Luther? He said, hey guys, what's going on? So here I have Paul, I have Augustine, and I have Luther in hell. And Paul said, it was works after all.
That's a good one.
Okay. Now, nobody knows what happens after death. And the only scientific things we can say is either there's no consciousness after death, or if you have believed some with the near-death experience business, the mind still may have images and expectations of delights, usually delights or torments. So I don't know how to judge that. I'm not a scientist. But nobody knows what happens after death. So every story, like my jokes about heaven and hell, is a design. Now, what is the function of tours of hell? It is to encourage people to certain kinds of ethical norms. So the story of Jesus and Lazarus is to say you should care for the poor. That's the message of the story of Lazarus and the rich man. It's not that there's a real hell. In the story, it's necessary to say that this is the problem if you don't care for the poor. So it has an ethical punch. And maybe the author, Luke, thought that there was a hell. I wouldn't be surprised, because you have, at this point, a hell or a Hades in Judaism, where in early Judaism you didn't. So where does this stuff come from? And it probably comes even from pre-Homeric poetry, where you have visits to the netherworld. And in the Odyssey, Book 11, you have Odysseus going to the netherworld to consult a prophet named Tiresias about how to get home. And when he's there, he sees a number of his companions, including Achilles. And he says, Achilles, how wonderful it is that here you are in Hades and you're the king of all the dead because of your heroism. And Achilles says, excuse me, I would rather be a slave on earth to a poor man than to be king of all the dead. It stinks down here. And then you have not only that, but you have the torments of Tantalus, who, where we get the word tantalizing. He can never get relief from his thirst or his hunger. Even though the water comes up to his chin, he can't drink it. Even there's fruit just within reach, but it's outside of reach, he can't do it. And so you have, but there is a heaven, the Elysian fields, but that's only for those who are the children of the deities or their loved ones, like Menelaus, who married Helen, and so on. So that's what you have in the Odyssey. Now, Socrates comes along, according to Plato, and says, those are really no good stories to tell children if you want them to go and be brave in battle. Because Achilles, the best of all of the warriors among the Greeks and in Greek mythology, would rather be a slave. So that means that people who are conscripted to go into the military are going to try to get out of it, right? Because why would they want to die? So Plato's solution is to have his own tour of hell, which includes both punishments for the wicked, but also a glorification for others, especially through a reincarnation. So the wicked are punished, and so that those things need to be avoided. But also there are catalogs of what is righteous, and so you have rewards. And Plato uses a myth of a soldier who dies. He visits the netherworld. He is allowed to come back to be the messenger of the gods to mortals and tells them about the torments of the wicked and the rewards of the righteous. And in fact, in the end, those who are totally righteous can be in the firmament. This is in the last book of the Republic. And there's another one in the Gorgias, which is somewhat similar. So these are, but we know for sure that Plato expects his readers to know it's all fiction. This is not historical stuff. It's crafted in order to create a mythology that encourages nobility in battle, which the stories in Homer did not. Virgil comes along, and in the Aeneid, he has Aeneas in book 6 go to the netherworld to consult with his dead father Anchises. And there he sees the torments of the wicked, but also the rewards of those like his father who were noble. And the point is for the reader to understand that from Hades, you get information about the Roman dynasty that goes from Aeneas to Augustus, and it's going to be noble, and there'll be an empire without end. So it really is quite a positive thing. Now, Lucian comes along and he says, all of that is bullshit. There is no hell. There is no Elysian fields. And in his satires, he has people go to the netherworld, and Menippus, who is a kind of he's a cynic, and he's a poor man. And he goes and he sees Tantalus being tormented, and he sees other rich people being tormented. And the whole point is to stick it to the wealthy in the Roman Empire and to say, go ahead and abuse your family, abuse others, and pile up wealth. And this is where you're going to go. And this is what you're going to suffer. But it's a satire, and everybody knows that it's a satire. And he also goes to the Elysian fields and sees people still making love and having feasts. And Homer is all over the place. They read Homer and enjoy him and so on.
If I may comment real quick, just a quick comment is sounds like Plato had a huge influence. Number one, preceding Aeneas, Lucian, Christianity, you name it. We also have way back in Egyptian lore, the Book of the Dead or the Living, depending on, and in theirs you have the Lake of Fire. You have this little pool of lava type fire. But the imagination is pretty interesting. So to be clear, just for anyone who's watching, what you're suggesting is Plato wrote this fiction, and he knew that other philosophers would have understood this as fiction, that this is not literally the case. And maybe that's his original intention. The question kind of becomes, how did people start taking this literal? The uneducated started to grab it. And was it formulated by elites to kind of dupe the general common people who aren't philosophers? Because philosophers don't need, it seems, in their own mind, we don't need to be threatened with fire in order to live noble lives, to be honorary people and be decent folks. This is something maybe the common folk might need in order to behave properly because they're not intellectuals. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there, something to chew on as we go in the episode.
Yeah, I don't think, Derek, and I'll tell you why. These are not the only kinds of myths that philosophers, including Plato, have. They use myth as a kind of argument for themselves. So it's not that Plato would have thought that such a thing existed. He rather articulates it because it's this kind of vision, as opposed to the one in Homer, that will make for better warriors. So surely other philosophers are going to have other understandings of the netherworld that may solve the same problem. But they know that they're doing philosophy through mythology. Now, this is an important point. We think that that philosophy is different from mythology. But for the Greeks, you craft your theology largely through a mythology. It is the way for you to make sense of the world in a pre-scientific time. And then with Aristotle and Greek science and so on, things change somewhat. But they know these are fictions. No, they're not trying to dupe anybody. They're not trying to pull the wool over someone's eyes. Now, did people read these stories and think they were true and so on? They probably did, but that's not what it was intended.